Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Writers and Fighters, a podcast. I'm your host, AJ Ortega, and this is the show where you get weekly interviews. And the interviews always feature someone in the writing world or someone in the fighting world. This is episode 31, and I interview Lauryn Lueken, an armored combat athlete. I had an armored combat fighter on episode 24, Nikki Guida, and it blew up, so I decided to do it again. Lauryn and I talk about how she first got into armored combat and steel fighting, what it's like being a woman in a male-dominated sport, her recent injuries, and her goals to represent the USA at the international level. We finish up talking about her dogs and then her reading and writing interests as well. I watched the UFC Fight Night over the weekend, headlined by Corey Sandhagen and TJ Dillashaw, and it was really almost like a pay-per-view caliber card. There were some really good fights on the main card. Really exciting fights. The few fights that went to decision had kind of similar criticisms about them in that the person that it looked like barely lost, ended up winning. And so, the decisions were reversed, right? And some people were saying certain people got robbed and things like this. I don't think it was that bad. I think it was super close, and therein lies the problem of leaving it in the judge's hands, right? One of the fights was Miranda Maverick and Macy Barber at the women's flyweight division. Really good match. And Macy Barber put on an impressive third round, but Miranda Maverick totally won the first two rounds, I thought. And Macy Barber won by split decision. That was one of those where Macy Barber's kind of a fan favorite, at least when put up against Miranda Maverick. And so that was kind of a disappointing one for me. I like Miranda Maverick a lot. She's studying to get her PhD in something, I forget. I've mentioned it on a previous podcast. In any case, I thought she had dominated the first two rounds, but Macy Barber pulled off an impressive third and I think stole the fight. I don't want to say robbery, but I think that left an impression, and so the judges gave her the win. Then at featherweight, in the men's featherweight division, Darren Elkins took on Derek Minner, and wow, what a fight, man. Darren Elkins took a beating in the first round, and Derek Minner was close to finishing him, and he was getting really, really close, and the referee let it go, and goes into the next round, and Derek Minner gasses out. On commentary, Daniel Cormier made the comment that he was doing like Homer Simpson when he fought Dredrick Tatum, the parody of Mike Tyson, where Homer takes a bunch of damage by just standing there until his opponent, in the boxing ring, until his opponent tires out, and then he just kind of taps him and they fall over and he wins. And so Darren Elkins was just taking a beating and very close to getting stopped several times. But Derek Minner gasses out, sure enough, and Darren Elkins wins by a KO or TKO in round two. Very impressive. And that one, again, doesn't go to the decision, doesn't go to the judges, doesn't go to decision, and so Darren Elkins secures a really cool win. And he's getting up there in age. He's like 36, 37, and they asked him, hey, what do you want next, and so on. And so he said he's going to keep on fighting, and there's interesting fights out there for him. Yeah, I think he has a few more. I think he has a few more in him. And he's 27-9. That's a lot of fights. It's actually a really good record, I think, for that volume and that age. Then at bantamweight, Kyler Phillips fought Raulian Paiva. And Phillips, I think in this one, again, he won, I thought. And Paiva ends up winning the decision. And that was one of those where I thought Kyler Phillips totally won the first two rounds. I'd have to rewatch that third one. But yeah, I just think Kyler Phillips won. And they gave it to Paiva. It looked like he was struggling the whole match, in my eyes. And so that was a really puzzling one. And in the main event, Corey Sandhagen took on TJ Dillashaw. TJ Dillashaw was returning after 2 years suspension for performance-enhancing drug stuff. I won't get too into it. It's been quite a saga. But this was his return. And so they put him right in there with Corey Sandhagen, who I believe was ranked number 2 at bantamweight. Can't say I agree with putting him with somebody that high in the rankings, but in any case, they go at it, and TJ Dillashaw gets a cut over his right eye, I believe. And it's towards the inside, towards the bridge of the nose, and it's a vertical cut at the inner part of his eyebrow. It's pouring blood right into his eye. And that stings and stuff, and you can't see. And he keeps kind of pawing at it right away. Herb Dean, the referee, stops it and has the doctor check it out. He says he's good to go, which is good. Again, it's not life-threatening, anything like this. It looks probably worse than it is in terms of long-term effects. You can stitch it up. Even at the end when it was quite opened up. Great cut man that dealt with this throughout the 5 rounds, because it goes 5 rounds. So good on the cut man. Really good job of controlling that cut. Again, it was still bleeding. It was still getting opened up. He did have the crimson mask, as they say, right? But it could have been far worse. It could have spread a little bit, but they did the best they could, and it was a really good cut man. And so I thought Corey Sandhagen won 3 rounds to 2, but it ends up going to TJ Dillashaw. I can't help but think it was because of, what we call octagon control, and not things like striking and takedown attempts didn't seem to add up in terms of the judges' scores in my eyes. It seemed to be more about kind of octagon control. And TJ Dillashaw was putting on pressure, but not really getting takedowns. He would take Corey Sandhagen's back, but from still a standing position, and kind of control him that way and really wrestle him and make him struggle. And so it looks like, TJ Dillashaw. But I don't see how you score that, because, that you score takedowns and the significant strikes and things of this nature. And those weren't takedowns. And so it was really, really interesting. I think the inconsistency you see in judging does get in the way of some cards. And this one, you can see there were 3 fights on the main card that went to decision. All 3 of them. And then I jumped on Twitter, and all 3 of them did all have kind of the same criticisms. Not overall, and again, we're fans and we're not judges and all these things. Of course, we don't want to be armchair judges, but when it seemed pretty consistent, the same criticism, then, maybe where there's smoke, there's fire, and there needs to be some reevaluating of these judges and what they're scoring on. In any case, great fights, even if the decisions were a little controversial, for lack of a better word. It was still a great event with exciting fights, and even the folks that lost their matches by decision, like Miranda Maverick and Corey Sandhagen, are still going to get big fights. They're still in the mix in the top of their division. And again, it's just one of those things you got to bounce back from and figure out how to finish a fight without letting it go to the scorecards. All right, y'all. Now it's time for the interview portion of the show, where I spoke to Lauryn Lueken, fighting for the Dallas Mythics. Again, an armored combat athlete, gracious enough to do an interview with me, so I hope you enjoy it. All right, y'all, we are in the interview portion of the show now, and I'm sitting here with Lauryn Lueken, calling from Dallas, Texas. Tell us a little about who you are, Lauryn, and how'd you end up here, and why are you talking to me?
Yeah, well, I'm asking myself that question. I just follow a mysterious Zoom link. No. Yes. My name is, he said, Lauryn Lueken. I'm based in Dallas, Texas. I currently do armored combat fighting, and so I'm just hanging out today talking about my experience in this sport, being a fighter, most importantly, being a female fighter in a male-dominated sport industry, and what it's been like.
Yeah, definitely. I've had lots of fighters, and a good portion of them being women, but not from this sport. From this sport, I've only had Mickey Guida, Mick the Merc over on Instagram. Shout out to him. And so I wanted to get your perspective, because they just seem like an interesting bunch. And definitely we'll get to the female angle and women specifically in this sport. But are you from Texas? So you're fighting out of Texas and working and whatnot in Dallas. Are you from there?
So I'm actually not originally from Texas. I know.
How dare
I
you?
was born in the Midwest in Indiana, and I moved to Texas when I was 6. So I have been living in Texas for the majority of my life. We have a saying that says, "Oh, you weren't born here, but you got here as fast as you could."
Yeah.
And so that's basically what happened with me. We moved here to the Dallas area when I was 6 for a job that my dad took. So I've kind of been here. I've bounced around. I went to college in the Houston area, and then I did a study abroad in the Middle East, Dubai to be exact. And post college, I lived in Florida for a little bit as I worked for the Walt Disney Company, doing marketing and events with them. But ultimately, my heart remained in Texas, so I made a way back to Dallas. So that's where I'm at now.
Very cool. And were you, again, when you grew up, you said you ended up in Dallas around 6, and that's like, when we started going to school and stuff like that. In school, were you an athlete? Did you do stuff in terms of sports at that time, like when you were young?
Yes, I'm the oldest of 4, and having 4 kids, my parents were like, "We always got to keep you guys busy." So
Sure.
I know I started as a small type doing gymnastics, ballet, but once we moved to Texas, my mom heavily put us in sports. So I did softball heavily for about probably a good 15 years, a little bit of basketball, some soccer, not not a lot of soccer. I wasn't as good as that as some of the other ones, but yeah, I did a lot of softball and basketball. But this is my first time in any sort of combat sport. However, fortunately, my hand-eye coordination and just power development that came with years and years of swinging a softball bat helped me out in a sport where, you're swinging axes and long swords. So being able to have that, oh, this muscle memory translates over, was definitely helpful as I went into doing more sword-based combat sports.
Oh yeah, definitely being able to swing something. Start off with at least some kind of foundation. That's great. You also mentioned working in marketing for Disney. You also mentioned going to school in Houston. So, did you study marketing? Was that like what you got your degree in and whatnot?
Yeah, I got my degree in public relations and advertising with a minor in marketing. So I am no stranger to the writing scene, right? I had a professor in college who used to be a former White House press secretary who told me, if you don't like writing, you're in the wrong field, because
Oh, sure.
there comes a ton of writing with public relations, advertising, marketing, whether it's copywriting, press releases. So I did go to school for that. I really liked doing everything that fell under that, from planning huge events and advertising them to a little bit different of what I'm doing now is more corporate product marketing. So it's a different ball game, but it's all in that umbrella, and it's been really interesting. I did spend some time with the Walt Disney Company doing marketing and events with them, which was cool. It's a really great resume booster, and it's definitely a good storyteller to be like, oh yeah, I used to work for the Walt Disney Company. People typically tend to like that. So
No, it's a great
yeah,
thing. Again, there's a handful of companies you want to have like on your resume in terms of that stuff. Disney and like NBC would, and Coca-Cola and Nike would be up there. So yeah, it's great. That's
yeah,
great.
definitely one of them.
And so, who do you train with there in Dallas? What's your crew called, or what's your group, or what do they call that? Your team? What is that?
My team. So my fighting team is called the Dallas Mythics, and we fight out of Warlord Combat Academy, located in Irving. And Warlord Combat Academy is I like to call it a one-stop shop when it comes to combat sports. So you've got your armored combat or steel fighting. Well, I call it armored combat. There's a couple names for it all over the world, right? It's more formally known as like PERT over in Europe. But it's just easier to say, armored combat or steel fighting. It's just a little bit more digestible for people who don't know it. But also there we have, they've got HEMA, which is historically European medieval or martial arts. There's also like BJJ classes, Russian Sambo, some fencing classes there. So it's kind of a one-stop shop for any sort of combat sport. So
Yeah, in one of the photos when I was when I was creeping your Instagram, you're training somewhere and in a training facility, and in the background I can see a banner that says like, Team USA Sambo, and I was like, oh, so they actually train in Russian Sambo there too. It must be a pretty cool gym because most places go for the jiu-jitsu and wrestling, judo, things like this, but kind of rare to see Russian Sambo in a gym like that. So I think that's great.
Yeah, we've got a whole class that specifically trains on Russian Sambo, and as being a part of the fighting team doing the steel fighting stuff, we get access to the additional classes that are offered through Warlord Combat Academy. So I know that we've got a couple people who have taken some of those Sambo classes and a couple of the BJJ classes just to see, how they can take that and incorporate it into a lot of what we do. Because when you look at it from the team-based style of fighting, the melee fighting, grappling and judo and Brazilian jiu-jitsu and even Sambo come into a really, really big component of it. And it's interesting to go to these classes and learn, okay, so this is how you do this Sambo move, and this is how you do this judo move. Now let's figure out how to do it in armor.
Right.
So it's definitely challenging, and it's exciting. It always is something new. But yeah, I had never heard of Sambo before I started going to Warlord Combat Academy. So it definitely opened me up to new areas of interest.
Yeah, I think a few more people became aware of Russian Sambo because of Khabib Nurmagomedov. That's one of the styles that is deep in his background in Dagestan and whatnot. So, yeah, I think that's awesome. And here we are talking about this fighting stuff. And I'm curious, how did you get into this stuff at first? So you're an athlete here and there, and then you go to school and so on, and then there's a sword in your hand. So we missed a step. So how did you first get into armored combat? How did you end up swinging axes and swords?
Yeah, no, that's a really important question. Now, originally, actually, my fiance had saw an ad, and he was like, "Hey, can you come with me to check this place out?" Because he didn't want to go alone, and I begrudgingly was like, "All right, whatever, let's go." And we went on a Monday, and they were doing a practice, and there were two women there at the time, and they came up to me, and they were so excited because they immediately saw another woman, a potential convert, and they were telling me all this. Yeah, we get to hit people with swords and axes, and one of them showed me her old helmet. She was like, "Yeah, I got hit by a polearm right on the head, right here." And my initial thought was, these people are crazy, like they're insane. Oh my goodness, not for me. But luck would have it, as the week played out, we went a couple more times so he could, try out some additional classes and try on the armor and see how he liked it. And by the end of the week, I was hooked, and I was like, where do I sign up? This is fun. So, and I've been doing it ever since.
Very cool. Very cool. And so you mentioned that some women kind of spotted you and were like kind of trying to recruit you and stuff.
Yes.
and here, my observation so far is that the armored combat stuff, steel fighting things of this nature, it's an interesting crew of people that end up in this sport. And I think in most combat sports, I think so. Tell me about the women in this sport, though. Because as I started to poke around, I was like, there's a following here. There is a good amount of including women in here, having their own teams and things like that. Tell me about the women specifically in armored combat.
So the women specifically in this sport are amazing. They're the most badass in kind people that I've ever met. Obviously, steel fighting, armored combat is fairly new to the U.S. And it's not really known about. So it's very already a small community, right? And in that small sports community, you have an even smaller knit community of the women's division fighters. And we have, femme fighters located all over who do this sport. And they are more tough, more badass, and they've got more determination than most male athletes that I've met before in my entire life. They've definitely are dedicated to what they do. And they're just so kind. One of my favorite memories is we went to, my team went to New Hampshire last September to participate in an Eastern conference. And there's a term in this sport called Iron Manning it. It's basically when you have the bare minimum number of people for your team, and meaning, yeah, you have the amount of people you can to fight, but you're going to have no breaks. You are fighting every single round. So I hope you don't tire out, and I hope you don't hurt yourself. So our team went up there and we fought against a women's team up there, and we had to Ironman it, and we ended up winning. And it was a brutal 21 round fight. We fought for, I don't think this is an exaggeration when I say this, 5 hours. It was a slog, and our team ended up winning, which was a great feeling because we were initially, short-staffed, the underdogs. But after we fought for 5 hours, we all hugged, and we were like, oh, hey, there's a river right there. And we took off our armor, and we all went and jumped in the river, and we were passing around a big bottle of wine, and just we were the bestest friends afterwards. So it's really cool because there's definitely a sense of camaraderie that we can get into the list and fight each other and hit each other. But as soon as we get out of it, there's definitely that friendship there that it's really nice to have.
Yeah, you mentioned the camaraderie and that these are tough people and so on, but kind people also.
Kind people,
and
yes.
One of the things I noticed last month, on several of like the gyms and the athletes, like on their Instagram and Twitter and whatnot, a lot of pride flags and things like this, being very forward and open about like, hey, this is for everyone. Like, and I thought that was super dope. Like just something that like I, as a casual observer, was able to pick up on. I was like, these people are tight.
Yes, absolutely. And that's one of the things that not just my team and my gym likes to practice what we preach, but I know that there's a lot of people in this community. We firmly believe that like there's a place on the stage for everybody, right? A place for everyone to come in and have fun and get it done. So we're very inclusive, regardless of your gender, sexual identity, whoever, whatever, gay, straight, pink, blue, whatever. You are a fighter. We will respect you as such, and you have a spot in the list with us. So everybody's super supportive, and I think that's it's really great to have that, right? Because typically when you think of like fighting, you think of people who are all adrenaline and a lot of like getting that brutality that comes with it. And a lot of the time when you see people out of fighting mode, they're just the nicest people, and they just want to be your friend and hang out with you.
And you mentioned also that, people will hug it out even if we're on the field and kind of, whacking each other with these steel objects and so on, and it's all good. But do people ever get like serious or intense about stuff, or maybe a real fight breaks out because of something that happened on the field? Because that does happen in boxing gyms or in even the pro wrestling world. Backstage, a real fight will happen after like, the illusion of the theatrical fight in the ring and these kinds of things. Baseball dugout fights, these kinds of things. Yeah. What kind of, like, does that stuff ever happen? I wonder, because that being so hot and so amped up with the adrenaline, does it spill over into like, okay, now we're really trying to hurt each other? What's happening,
I wish I could say it doesn't, but I've seen it happen a couple times. Sure. There's only been one time where I've seen like one guy lose his cool and like hit a down fighter. Ouch. And he's no longer in our league. He got his behavior. That was just the beginning of it. Yeah, he got chewed out, and people were like, you don't do that. There's
don't bring that energy here. Yeah.
Exactly. And I mean, like, I've seen people more on the men's side. If I'm going to be straight up honest with you, I really haven't seen it from the women's side of fighting. Anybody lose their cool or something. But typically I think that for the most part, I've seen, people get upset with like a ref's call, and they're like, that was bullshit. And they get upset, or that was an illegal hit, and they get heated, and they'll leave the list. And then afterwards, everybody's pretty calm. They, hey man, sorry. I was just mad earlier. I just disagreed with that. And so for the most part, I mean, like, I've seen it, but nothing to where somebody's like throwing off their helmet and being like, I'm going to beat your ass right now.
Right. Good. Well, I figured there was maybe some of it, but because of the group, I think would self-police. And like you said, we bounced this guy because he was trouble. So. Yes,
absolutely.
So another cool thing I like poking around on armored combat athletes' Instagram and whatnot, seeing injuries and scars and bruises and stuff. You suffer any intense injuries or typical just surface bruises and whatnot?
I laugh because I'm literally nursing an injury right now. I've only suffered, okay, to be honest with you, I've suffered 2 injuries in this sport, and they were all out of armor injuries. So they were while doing, soft kit grappling practice. The first one was, my first year in the sport. I was grappling with a male fighter, and he went to do a judo trip, and I blocked it, so he had hyperextended my leg, and I had tore something in my knee, and had to be out for that. And recently in May, we did a training camp where we had fighters from all over come and obviously train together as a way to, grow your skills and spread the knowledge. And we were doing a warm up, and we were on the mat doing some grappling. And again, I was grappling with a male fighter, and he fell on my ankle. And at the time it hurt super bad. And I was like, ooh, ouchie. That'll be fine. And I jumped back in literally last week to a practice with it not entirely healed. And I had one of my teammates kicked my leg from underneath me, sent my ankle in the wrong direction, and tore a ligament even more. So it just shows that it was my own stupidity too. And so I'm kicking myself in the face because I'm definitely
too early.
Yeah, I'm definitely one of those people that I don't want to stop, right? Because if I'm stopped fighting, I feel like I'm not doing anything. So, but now I'm like, all right, we have a fight this weekend in Portland that we're supposed to be going to, obviously, that I will not be fighting at. And I'm having to deal with the mentalness of that because, you don't want to have to ever sit out for injury, especially if it's something that could be avoidable. But it happens. I mean.
Oh, yeah. And once you're it happens in all sports, but once you're in combat sports, just the risk for, especially joint injury stuff, again, a knee and an ankle, that's about par for the course for these kinds of things,
Yeah.
Same side, same leg? Or
yeah, actually, same leg. It's the right leg.
Yeah, both knee and both ankle, yeah.
Both my right knee and my right ankle. Most of the time in armor injuries are just like bruises. The biggest thing I've sustained in actual combat is a bruise because I didn't have armor there. And, there's how I've built my kit. There's particular areas. Yeah, I've got gaps, and someone got a good shot on me. But most of the injuries that I've seen are out of armor because people are going, too hard or not being careful in their practice. So, and I think that kind of can happen with most combat sports. You find it in the practice than the actual performance.
No, yeah, definitely. Yeah, that happens in professional boxing and MMA where I got cut in over the eye in sparring. Now I gotta wait X amount of weeks. I gotta push this fight back or whatever. So those things definitely happen. You miss out on some stuff. So we talked a little bit about your background, your experience in the sport as a woman. Do you think people have misconceptions of armored combat? And maybe also the people within it?
Oh my goodness. We could be here for an hour if I go on to this because the short answer is yes. Specifically, the misconceptions people have against women are a whole nother conversation. But one of the things, in general, I always think it's hilarious when people see this sport. There's either one or two trains of thought. People look at it and they're like, "Oh, so you're LARPing medieval times, right? You're
Right.
LARPing," and I'm like, No, it's all live combat. I have no idea who's going to win. We have no idea what's going on. Pre ahead of time, you just get in there and you literally just have your own skill to rely on it. And it's heavy, real armor. It's anywhere between from 50 to 100 plus pounds, depending on the person in their armor. It's not just putting on some, costume and going in there and LARPing. On the opposite end of that, I hear people all the time being like, "Oh man, I can never do that because I would just see red and I would kill somebody. Man, I would just be a danger. I would kill people. And I don't want to go to jail." No, you wouldn't. I doubt you would even last a minute in there because your body's not trained to wear armor like that and also be able to effectively fight. The injury rate when you're properly trained, it's just also, yes, we fight with real weapons, but that weapons are blunted. I'd have never seen anybody even come close to remotely be able to kill somebody, like unless you're like doing an illegal shot to the back of the neck. But those type of things we hear all the time. If it's not like, oh, you guys are LARPing, it's, oh, I would kill somebody, I'm too hardcore for this. Like, no, you're not. Calm down.
Right. No, that's so funny. Yeah, the thing when people see the armor, that idea that it's a costume, you mentioned that a moment ago. Yeah, that's really interesting. People not exactly understanding, well, even in the costuming world, armor is supposed to be functional. Like, once upon a time, people actually used this to actually protect their body, right? And so people skip over that part of just actual combat history and want to jump into, oh, well, it's theatrical. It is like LARPing. It's a show. No, it's not, and again, that's again, one of the reasons I had Mickey on several episodes ago and invited you on to kind of continue to dispel that myth, because once you start watching this stuff, you're like, this ain't no fucking medieval times shit. This is for real. And
for real, yeah. And it's crazy because, like, before I got into it, I didn't know anything, right? I didn't know anything about armor. I didn't know anything about like fighting styles. And so now I have this plethora of, hey, you want to know a random fact? This was built off of the medieval tournament, medieval tournament sector, like back in the medieval ages. You have these knights, and they would do these tournaments to, 1, get money, 2, keep their skills up to date, 3, get better, and then also, like, in between war times, you needed something to do so you weren't slacking. So, knights would travel, people would host these tournaments, you would fight with blunted weapons to show people, like, hey, I'm the best at hand-to-hand sword combat. Or they would also do, team melee battles, and then they would also do jousting. I know that they kind of touch on it a little bit in A Knight's Tale, but it's actually funny because recently, after joining the sport, I was reading a book, Duncan and Egg by George R. R. Martin, a spinoff of, the Game of Thrones series. And they talk about, because Sir Dunk is a knight and he goes to these tournaments, and I'm able to read this and be like, I know exactly what you're talking about. I know exactly what kind of helmet you're talking about. This is real because I do that. So a moment of excitement, because like you get to see that the stuff that you're doing is actually a thing, and people did do that. So you get to learn about all this historical relevance of things that people did back then, and learn about the different types of armor and their relevance of time periods. So it's cool if you're a history buff too, right? So you get to fight and then learn about this stuff at the same time. So
no, I think that's great that there is this history and culture behind the sport as well, and especially in combat sports. I always think that's really interesting to dig into. Where did this stuff come from? What are the historical and cultural roots that made this shit stick around hundreds of years later? I think that's really fascinating. I think that's dope.
Yeah, and the cool thing is that as you get to continue to learn about historical accuracy and stuff, and I think that kind of plays around with, like, in part of the misconception, because all of the armor, all of the weapons that we wear has to be historically accurate. Like, as much as I want to, I can't run up and fight in a Dark Souls inspired suit because it's fantasy, and it's fantasy for a reason. So there's rules and an authenticity committee, though it's the bane of everyone's existence because they become a stickler of the ridiculous of things, but they make sure that everything that we're wearing is historically accurate, is actually, proper to the time period, and is real armor and not just something that we saw in a video game. So I think that's kind of part of a misconception too, is people are like, oh, well, I can just create my own armor and they'll come in with this real thin Dark Souls looking Skyrim helmet or whatnot. And it's like, oh, well, that's more of that LARP that we were talking about.
Yeah, it's look cool and show off, but maybe
that is still part of it. You gotta look cool and show off. That's the whole battle.
Hell yeah. What are your future goals in Armored Combat? What do you want to do with this?
Oh, that's a really great question. So recently, I qualified to be on Team USA for both HMB and IMCF. Now, I know I'm saying those alphabet soups, and it means absolutely nothing to you. The way I like to always kind of compare it is, to the American football system. You've got, You had football, and then you have the two leagues that, fight within that. And that's essentially what it is. So you've got H&B, which means Historical Medieval Battle, and then you have IMCF, which is International Medieval Combat Federation. And they're very similar. One's backed by Russia, one's backed by Ukraine. They each have an international competition every year or so, where they have countries from around the world come and represent, and you fight. So I've won spots in the women's melee and pole arm to go represent the United States, and obviously that fell through due to COVID. Second time in a row that happened, because they canceled the 2020 as well as 2021. So eventually I would like to be able to do that again, secure a spot, go back over, and finally fight against someone from another country. Just because when you're fighting against people, from other countries, it's just thinking about how much you can learn from them, whether they're good, whether they're bad. It gives you that experience, helps you grow as a fighter, and just would significantly launch your growth, I guess, trajectory, if you will, in this sport. So that's my goal for myself, is to be able to go fight overseas and represent the United States officially, because I got the spot. I never got to go do it. So that's my next goal.
Oh, I think that's a good one. That'd be awesome to see you on that level. And again, to represent the USA, but also the experience of fighting other fighters from other countries with other training styles and I think that's just growth and experience. I think that's awesome. Love it.
Yeah. It's a firm belief of, what is it? Iron sharpens iron. So you get the best from the U.S. fighting the best from, best from Russia, best from France, best from UK, and see what you can learn from there. So it's when it finally happens, post-COVID world, it'll be exciting.
Hell yeah. So I got to ask again, on your Instagram, I saw this really beautiful husky. Tell me about your dog. Is it your only dog? You got other dogs? Tell me about your dog.
I have two of them. I have two of them, and they look identical.
Oh, cool.
So it's interesting. One of them, she's 4, and she's a Pomsky, which is a Pomeranian and a Husky mix. Ooh. So she looks just like a Husky, identical to a Husky, except for she's got long Pomeranian hair. And it's the softest hair that I've ever felt in my life. And she's so crazy. We got her as a rehome. So there was a younger couple who had just had a baby, and I don't know if you know anything about Husky dogs. They are ridiculously energetic and anxious dogs. So when you mix that with a Pomeranian who's got that like high energy as well, she was a year old, so she was still a puppy, and they were like, "We can't do this.
Oh yeah,
we had a baby. We need help."
Yeah, I understand.
So we took her. Yeah, we took her from them, and she's been great. We have another one. We got her a playmate, because 2 is better than 1. Yeah. And she is a 2-year-old Alaskan Klekai. So she's a mini husky. Yeah. They literally bite-sized husky. They're the Klekai is part of, I think it's Inuit for small dog,
right?
Or little dog.
What's interesting, I'd seen those online, because I had a husky mix before this dog I have now, my little Australian Kelpie. But that so digging around online and looking at husky stuff, I came across Alaskan Klekai stuff. I was like, what a cool little, they just shrank a fucking husky, how dope. And I saw one in person for the first time, like maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago. Like I was at the bar I went to, and this guy had this little tiny dog, and all the servers were freaking out. And I was like, what are they freaking out about? And I was like, oh my God. And I started freaking out and went over to check out the little mini husky, the little tiny miniature husky. Very cool.
It's so crazy. Like I will take them on a walk or go to the dog park, and people will look and they'll be like, "Oh, is it a husky puppy?" And I'm like,
"She's full grown."
No, she's full grown. And when you look at them, at first they definitely do look like, oh, it's just a husky puppy. But then as you continue to look at them, you're like, well, that head is a little bit more slender, because puppies typically are like chunky. They got them thick bones. And you're like, wait a minute, that bone structure looks like a full-grown animal. And then you're like, yeah, it is. It's not a puppy. But we joke and call her, Klekais are your forever puppies. So they stay puppies forever, just in looks.
Oh yeah. No, yeah. I lucked out with that husky in that it didn't have a lot of husky qualities. Like my husky wasn't high energy, didn't dig, didn't howl. And I was like, how did I get so lucky? Because everybody's just like, yeah, my husky, I got to run it this many miles a day. I got to secure the yard because it's digging through it. It's howling when I'm gone, these kinds of things. And Yeah, they're made to work, so they still have that. Even mixes and things like that, they still have that.
It's funny because with our Klikai, she still has all the husky traits. She likes to run, likes to dig. She howls, but obviously it's a tiny dog, so instead of like those low like "Arr!" it's like a high pitch like "Arr!" and you're like, okay, stop
We
it.
gotcha.
We gotcha. Nails on a chalkboard. Calm down. So that's one husky quality I wish she didn't get because it's like amplified. But she's very vocal. She'll tell you how she feels.
Very cool. Very cool. So you mentioned a little bit before some reading and writing stuff in passing, and this is the Writers and Fighters podcast. Clearly, you're a fighter. Clearly, we've established that. What about writing? What about reading and writing? So again, you study marketing, which has to do with writing and whatnot. But are you into reading, and do you do any writing? Tell me.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Unfortunately, most of my writing these days comes from, it's professional writing, right? Writing in a professional setting. So it's a lot of working on writing for marketing, but still you still have to bring a lot of those writing aspects in it. For the longest time when I was in high school and going through college, I always enjoyed the creative writing aspects. I remember at a time when I was in elementary school, I participated in this young writers competition, and I was like in the fourth grade, and I won, and they like published my tiny book, and I got to go part of a conference. And I always thought about, I'm gonna go to college for creative writing. I just love writing. I would be one of those people who would get an idea and just have tons of notebooks filled with like fake stories as I wrote. Not so much anymore. I don't have the time for that. So a lot of my creative outlets is putting together some great marketing material for brands to use. But in terms of reading, it's funny because I'll be the first to admit I'm an avid user of TikTok. I'm one of those older millennials that they make fun of for being on that app. But there's a side of it. They call it book talk, and I've found some really good reading recommendations. So I'll just like screenshot it. I'm like, oh, okay, I'll screenshot it, and then I'll look it up to see if it is the summary of the book, and then I'll save it to my TBR folder. It's actually funny that you asked this because 2 days ago from Amazon, I finally went ahead and bought like a big sketchbook and some markers so I can go ahead and just do a to be read book and really start motivating myself. Like, man, you've got like 175 books on this list. You should start reading it. So I've finally bit the bullet. It's just so hard. I have excessive ADHD, so I have a physical book I'm reading right now. I also have an audiobook that I'm trying to read. And there was an ebook that I just downloaded, and I was like, there's too many things. I can't trying to digest this much media consumption is a little bit hard. But yes, I definitely have been in multiple book clubs. I just like talking about books, reading, writing, a lot of fantasy, mystery, nonfiction type things. And I'm always open to book recommendations. So if anybody's hearing this and you want to drop a comment or something on the Writers and Fighters podcast, I'll look it and I'll take your recommendation.
I'm the same way with I want to read like everything and I can't. And again, I don't have really good focus lately. And so I'm just like, I finished a book and then bought 4, and it's like, well, I'll never finish reading my books if I continue to buy more than I read.
Oh, I know. One thing that I have found that's so helpful for me, and I know that this is going to cause a hot debate, or this is a hot debate topic in like the reading and writing community, is as I've gotten older, my love for audiobooks has become more appreciative, because for the longest time, for this company that I'm working with now, I was living so far away. I would have like an hour and a half commute in the morning and like 2 hours in the evening, just to get to work. So I would be like, I'm gonna slap on an audiobook, and I was just blasting through them because as you're stuck in the car for 3 hours at a time. So I found that as I've gotten older with my busy lifestyle, like just putting on an audiobook is a great way to be able to read with a busy schedule. I know a lot of people are like, oh, you're not reading if you're listening to an audiobook.
Well, those are old people with antiquated ideas. Fuck all that. I'm a writing teacher.
Exactly.
And I've so much evolved from that. I'm like, I used to be physical books only, like not even like my own stuff. Like I didn't want published online. I was like, it has to be on paper. No, fuck it. I love my shit online now. It's like and audiobooks and things like this are so valuable, and it's coming from the same place. Communication. Like I'm an English teacher and I teach creative writing and stuff like that. But that is part English and literature and all that stuff is actually in this area of communications as well. We think it's separate. And it's like, well, that's verbal communication as well, and listening and thinking and all these things that go into what we think of as quote unquote reading. It's like, well, no, you're reading if you listen to the audiobook, you know? Like even my students, like I'll give them a short story to read and I'll be like, well, here's the author reading it on YouTube. Follow along, you know?
Yeah.
Like, and things like that, well, why not? Why wouldn't we use that tool? You know, you've read and consumed more books now because of audiobooks.
It's true. It's absolutely true. I know that there's a lot of reading snobs and reading purists who will say listening to the book is not the same as reading it. And I'm like, I'm consuming it. I'm digesting it. I know the story. Reading it on paper versus listening to it is not going to change how I learn the story. So
yeah, no, I get you. I'm a big fan of the audiobooks now, and big fan of like the podcast stuff. I did like a road trip. And I found some podcast series called like Fall of Civilizations, and I downloaded an episode about the Spanish conquest of the Aztec Empire. And it was like 5 hours of a history lesson of shit I'm into, and it was so enthralling. I was like, when would I consume that much information without sitting in front of the book for a whole weekend, you know?
Right, yeah. There's awesome. Some topics like that
I learned
that
so
it's just
much.
easier. Yeah, it's just easier to consume that way. Like super boring things. Like it helps if you have like an engaging narrator. Because I let me tell you, I've read some books that I'm like, this is a topic I'm interested in, but it's a slog, and I'm not having the most difficulty finishing this book.
Right.
So
yeah,
having an audiobook would have been more beneficial.
Yeah, definitely. So we talked about a whole bunch of cool stuff. And I think people will probably find you quite interesting and want to keep up with you and see pictures of you swinging those swords. Where can people keep up with you in terms of social media and whatnot?
That's a great question. You can find our fighting team, the Dallas Mythics, on Facebook at the Dallas Mythics and Instagram. And I believe those are just Facebook and Instagram. I have a personal Instagram, and it is Lovely Lauryn, just lovely_Lauryn, and you can follow me there. Post all my little fighting stuff. I will gladly welcome you into what I call my internet simps. I have a friend. She fights on our team, and she's huge on TikTok. Her name is Ashley McLamara, and people know her. I think her TikTok handle is like Thrashly, and she is just like the amount of times I've seen. I think one of her videos got picked up by some media company, and they featured her and whatnot. But we have a running joke that like with this sport, and you're on the internet, comes our internet simps, and we're like, yes, I welcome my internet simps, people who like women in armor beating people up. Like you have found the right avenue. We're here. So
good. No, yeah, I think some of my listeners will be quite pleased then. So we'll direct people over to lovely_Lauryn on Instagram. Get some of these.
That would be me.
These simps all up in your business over here.
That's what we're here for. Simps.
Well, Lauryn, I had a good time talking to you. I appreciate you doing this. I want you to keep swinging those swords, knocking people out and whatnot, and going across the pond, as it were, and eventually representing Team USA. I'm rooting for you on that one.
Absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm rooting for it too. I'm hoping to finally be able to go over there and don the red, white, and blue tabard and kick some ass, some metal ass.
There we go. And also, good luck on healing up from the injury and stuff.
Yeah, there's that. I'm literally counting down the days. Oh, okay, it's been this amount of weeks. I can get back into it. But unfortunately, that's just part of the game. Hurting and healing.
Right. There we go. Hopefully more healing than hurting lately. So
yeah.
All right,
yeah,
Lauryn.
You bet.
I appreciate you. You be good, all right?
All right. Thank you so much.
All right, y'all. Thanks for listening to that interview with Lauryn Lueken, armored combat athlete from the Dallas Mythics. If you want to follow that team, get over to facebook.com/the Dallas Mythics. and you heard about where she trains, Warlord Combat Academy. Go over to facebook.com/Warlord Combat Academy. And I know you simps want to follow Lauren herself. Go over to Instagram @lovely_Lauren, @lovely_Lauren. As far as the podcast, you guys know the drill. Follow on your favorite podcast app. Follow on social media like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. RidersandFighters.com has an episode guide. Weekly episodes. Maybe go into the back catalog. Find an episode you thought was particularly good. Send it to a friend. Say, hey, this might be interesting. Aside from that kind of stuff, all you guys got to do is be good, be safe, take care of each other. We'll talk next week.